Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, welcome. It's Phil Terry, and it is Friday, September 28th, 2018. This is our Fall Council's General Session Keynote number 1 with Chris Fralic, partner at First Round Capital, whom I will introduce in just a moment. So the Austin Council meetings start now with this very session. We will still be doing keynotes in person when the stars align for the right people to join us, but we will also be adding this series throughout the year. And later speakers include Chip Conley, Tina Sharkey, who is the CEO of Brandless and co-founder of that company, which has been doing really well and making some big news, especially with their recent $240 million SoftBank investment. And others who will be joining us, including some CEOs of the Berkshire Hathaway companies. We're going to have an interesting range of speakers, I'm happy to say, as we have in the past. So today, as I mentioned, Chris Fralic, partner at First Round Capital. He's one of the most successful venture capitalists of his generation. This is my opinion talking, by the way. He doesn't know I was about to say that. He's led many successful investments that have been acquired by Google, Amazon, Yahoo, Adobe, and several that are public companies. He also works closely with First Round's investments in Warby Parker, Hotel Tonight, Refinery 29, Adaptly, and Roblox. I first met Chris when he was the VP of Business Development at Delicious, an early Web 2.0 startup and client of ours back in the day at Creative Good, and which Yahoo went on to buy. He also helped launch TEDTalks, which I think just a few people, something like 6 billion, have watched, and was one of the early employees at Half.com, which was sold to eBay. And the funding actually from that helped to launch First Round Capital. He's written extensively on how to become, quote, insanely connected, how to ask for email introductions, how to be human in business. And he and I are in radical agreement about being, quote, relational versus transactional in our human relationships. I interviewed him recently for the book, and after that I asked him if he'd be willing to do this today, and he so graciously said yes. In this keynote, he'll walk us through the art of building a great network, including how to ask for introductions, follow-ups, and other practical topics. So Chris, really appreciate you taking some of your precious time today to spend with the councils. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I'm just going to say to everyone, remind you that if you have comments or questions, post them through the GoToWebinar panel. I will be monitoring that, and there will be a point where actually Chris is going to pause. He's going to ask everyone a question, and we'll ask you guys to type in comments that he and I can both see. So without further ado, Chris, thank you again for being with us today.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil. It's an honor to be here with the councils today. And I think it's, the relationship that I've built with Phil over the years is testament to, how I look at the world and what I like to share, and that has seemed to resonate a bit lately. So I'm pleased to take you through it today. You can.
I meant to mention, Chris, that, not only did we meet a long time ago, but that you've been a supporter of the councils. You've been to some of our events in New York in the past, and it's been a nice relationship that way. Yeah.
Yep. I enjoyed our trip to the Berkshire Hathaway. Quite memorable.
Yeah. Well,
I recommend it to anybody who hasn't gone. You should go.
Come to Omaha with us next year. Yeah.
Go to Omaha.
That's really great. Okay.
But yeah, so as Phil mentioned, I'll tell you a little bit more. I've been a partner at First Round for a little over a dozen years now. We're a seed stage technology investor that, we'll mention some of the companies that I work with. Some that we have worked with are household names like Uber. Some you may have never heard of, like Beautiful.ai, which is the tool that I'm using to give this presentation, and a whole lot in between. And again, the concept is to start off with a big picture view of relationships and how you're building your reputation over decades and careers, and then take it right down into how do you make an email introduction and properly follow up at kind of the atomic level of that, and how many relationships start today. So to kick it off, this is I grew up in Pittsburgh, and both of my grandfathers were steel workers. And my grandfather Raymond worked for 45 years in the Westinghouse mill as a welder. And when he retired, his buddies welded him this plaque. And I thought of how that might compare to something I collect. This is all of the business cards I've ever had.
That's so cool.
So a couple differences. One is I've had a lot more than one job. I'm guessing people on the phone, theirs would look more like mine than my grandfather's. And it's interesting, you can look through and see, like, at what year did emails start showing up on business cards and the like. But a lot of the story is the relationships that were built early on in my career that followed me through, or connections that I had no idea would lead to a lot of things. Like, for example, the TED conference is an important thing to me that I started attending over 20 years ago, and met my business partner Josh Koppelman through that, and that led to half.com and eBay and First Round and more. And just it puts it in perspective, and I'd encourage you to think of it in the long run for how these connections and relationships are being built over time.
Yeah.
Phil gave a bit of my bio. This lists a few of the other companies. If you're on Twitter, I'm pretty active there. I will add that I'm one of the first 100 users on Twitter that are still active today, but we didn't invest in Twitter, and we had an opportunity to. So you should take everything I say with a grain of salt, because we weren't smart enough to invest in Twitter. But that's a whole nother talk. But
oh, can we talk about all the things we missed, Chris?
Yeah, there's a little bit on that. We can finish up with that or talk more about it. But these are some of the companies that I work with today. Some you probably never heard of unless you're in a specific industry, like a Troops or Outlier or even a Daply. Some you may have, like Refinery, or maybe you wear Warby Parker glasses, or got a hotel room on Hotel Tonight, or if you have kids, maybe they play Roblox. But these are the companies that I'm active with today. And this next slide, and again, I love this from the tool, Beautiful AI. Let me do that with ease. These are the companies I've been involved in that have had successful outcomes, like where we've at least doubled our money, and in some cases, many more times than that. But these are the winners that have been locked in, and when you're in my business, that's really what you're playing for. What I'm not going to show you, but there are the equal number, are the losers, where we lost every penny that we put in. What I mentioned one of, and there's a whole lot more, are the misses, which are the ones that we were there at the table, we should have invested but didn't. And I think it's important to be self-conscious and aware of all those things and track them and learn from them. But again, to start off with, I like to think of it in terms of the big picture, the career-long, ultimately the brand and reputation that you're building, and just to think of it in those terms, because I think a lot of people tend to think much more granularly or on a transactional basis than over the long term. And a good framing point of that is from a friend of mine who was the CEO of the Girl Scouts of America, Congressional Medal of Freedom recipient, Frances Hesselbein, where she says, leadership is how to be, not what to do. And I think it relates to relationships and basically these shouldn't be tips and tricks that you use because you think they'll work, but they should be things that you believe and do because that's who you are. And I just think that's that's an important framing point here.
Yeah.
I
That's
would
great.
also add another favorite quote of mine from Peter Drucker and Francis's nonprofit that I was on the board of for many years. The goal was to take Peter Drucker's management skills and apply them to the social sector to strengthen leadership in the social sector. But he has a great quote, which another just good grounding point to me, which is, the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And in my career, I've been in sales and business development for a lot of it. And I think it's an underappreciated part of what we do. And there's a whole lot of talk about, product and finance and tech and, general management. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of this is towards building, commercial relationships and getting the cash register to ring and ultimately create, even if it's not for dollars, creating a customer, I think, is a good grounding point. And a lot of, I think, these, like the outreach part of this can relate to that directly.
Chris, before you move on, I'll just say, in terms of the Drucker quote, that's in Customers Included, and that's actually, this quote is one of my favorite quotes as well, and I talk a lot about it when I give my talks. That's and great. I wonder if say just a little bit, because one of the things I love about this quote is the word create.
Yes.
Very few people talk about creating customers, having customers, serving customers, whatever, treating customers well. But this, how do you think about that word create in this quote? Could you say?
Yeah, I think like if you were to build it out a little bit, create would also involve keeping, like that there's an element of everything, it also puts the onus on you more than just they exist and show up or walk in the door, and you're creating it through every interaction. And again, like I think you're in the context of this is you're creating relationships. They're not accidental. They're not based on, they're like they can be purposefully built and cultivated.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. So here's the question part. I'd love to ask the listeners to type in or say, what does it mean we say, what's your brand?
And is this personal brand or the company brand?
I mean personal brand. I mean you individually and personally. What does it mean?
So everyone who's on the line, what I'd love for you to do is to put into the chat section of the control panel your thoughts.
Everybody doesn't have to do it, but if we get a couple, I'd just love to hear, a couple first takes on what that means to you.
Yeah, and again, you don't have to get it perfect or write the sentence with all the right grammar. Just throw some, fragments of thoughts in there. And we'll just give you, 30, 60 seconds to think about that and pause for a moment. What is your brand, your personal brand?
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
I can't hear clicking. I don't see anything here yet.
Yeah, I don't see. I hope so.
If we don't get one, maybe just
put
your Phil, or you could give me your take on that. I'd love to hear what you.
Yeah.
Let's see if we get any.
Just to shout out a few names that I hope are willing to throw something in there: Jason, Bob, Ashish, Evelyn, Greg, Kevin. I think, Kevin, this is a great question for you to think about right now. Love to see you throw some comments here into the chat. Or you could post it in questions. Oh, here, and that's where it's going.
Questions, Phil.
That's where it's going. Okay, we got some in there. Okay.
Okay, I don't see them, but tell me what they say.
The way you live your life and how others see you.
Okay, that's good.
That's from Gonzo. Bob said, my brand, digital enabler. Digital enabler. Mark said, what people can rely on me for. What are the core attributes and spiritual values people think of me for? Okay.
Great. Give me one more.
Steve Sterling, who actually runs a nonprofit, genuine, sincere.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good smattering. I think they're all true. Where I'm
Yeah.
coming from is a slightly different take, or maybe a more specific view. Like, to me, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. and from a perspective of like outreach and networking, connecting, it's when your email shows up in their inbox, do they smile and lean in and look forward to responding or seeing what you have to say, or do they roll their eyes, hit archive, ignore? That's like, that is your brand in their eyes, and that's what you're looking to build up over time.
Yeah.
And
what do people say when you're not in the room? I love it.
Yep.
I love it.
And then somebody said it, like, sincerity, authenticity. Like, to me, it has to be that. Like, you know, personally, if you find like to be hypocritical is the worst thing you could say about me. Like, if you hear me saying something in this talk and you know me to be different, that would be crushing to me, because that's something I strive to be. And I would, you know, I strive to be authentic, and I would encourage everyone to do that, or don't play this game if that's not naturally where you are.
Hey, Chris, the person who said sincerity was Steve Sterling, who's the CEO of MAP, which provides medicine. Their mission is to provide medicine for the world. They provide life-changing medicines and health supplies to people in need all over the world.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So this is my favorite quote from Lou Holtz of Notre Dame football fame. When all is said and done, more is said than done. Another way to just simply put it is, I would posit, after 34 years in business, that if you simply do what you say you're going to do, you're going to be in the top quartile.
Yeah.
Lots of people throw a lot of comments about what they will do and promises and don't follow up, and just simply doing that will make you stand out.
Yeah.
Another corollary to that is following up on what happened as a result of an interaction, or if you made a commitment to do it and prove it and go back to the person that you made the commitment to, will put you in an even smaller group.
Yeah.
And like, in my world, I'll give you an example. When we live off of referrals, people send startups to us, and we look at them, and usually 99 times out of 100 we say no. That's the way our business works. But we make it a point to always follow up with the person that made the referral and let them know what happened either way and why we passed if we did pass. And very often I'll get a response back from the referral source saying, no one has ever done that before. Thank you for telling me you didn't invest. At least I know you met, and I have some context when I go back to that founder.
Yeah.
Like, so would highly recommend you think about following up as a good skill to cultivate. And then just generally, you're always looking beyond. I recommend you look beyond the specific transaction, the thing that you're looking for or reaching out about today. Perfect example, just imagining, you know, all the product leaders on this call, how many interviews are you doing every day to fill a job? If you only look at that candidate as success if you hire them, and failure, a waste of time if you don't, like, I would argue every interaction is a chance to build, you know, their knowledge of you, yours of them. If this isn't a fit, what might you learn, or how could you better connect down the road as a result of it? And to think of it in those longer term views.
Yeah.
Napoleon Hill said it simply about giving before you get. I've heard another startup just yesterday was talking about a term they call generous networking, as a concept of you know, just not like, there's a lot of people I hear from only when they're specifically asking for something, and I think it's helpful if you think about how you can help others first. And as I kind of alluded to, I think the goal is to add value in in all you do, in every interaction. Even if you're saying no, it's doing so quickly and with respect. And even if, and there's two-way learning happening. You're reaching out to someone about an opportunity or a big ask or whatever it is, and they say no. Well, you've learned something about what they might like or not like for the next time you interact. And they're learning about you. How do you act when you're making the ask, when you hear a no? How are you responding to that? There's two-way learning happening in every interaction. And then, just another big picture view before we get into the detailed stuff is, I referred to it when I showed my winners, and I think by and large, people only remember the winners. Whether you're a VC and you lead with all your hot companies, whether you've had a lot of jobs and some were big successes and some were not. If you get enough at bats, if you have enough trials over time, people are optimists and tend to only remember the winners, and that's a good thing. And so to me, that means you shouldn't be afraid to take risks to get more wins. But I also would argue, be careful not to take 3 years to get 1 year of experience. And making sure that if something's not working, you're looking forward to finding a way out of it, or just being aware of it. And one tool that I would recommend is, if you're going into a job, or you're going, you're in sales working on a big proposal, is to make predictions about likely outcomes. Give yourself timelines about whether they're going to, when they're going to happen by or not, and be intellectually honest about them. If I could recommend one book, I think I mentioned to Phil when we chatted. It's called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. Is the best thing I've read in a long time, particularly about just the concept of, like, what are all the things that at the time of making that bet? And that's kind of what I'm referring to here when you write down predictions, versus only judging things by the outcome, because you don't control everything. There's luck factors that you should be aware of that are separate from all the information and that you have at your fingertips at the point when you make a decision.
Yeah. It's a great book, by the way.
Yeah.
Book. And so see if I can.
That sort of wraps the first portion. We'll go into the second. I just thought I'd check in if there's any questions or comments.
One of our listeners, Preston Smalley at Comcast, has his hand raised, although I don't know if he meant to do that. So I just sent him a chat. Preston, did you have a question? Did you want to put it into the question panel here? If you did. Oh, didn't mean to. Okay. Jason Randall just asked, what was the book again? It's Thinking in Bets, Jason. We'll put it in an email after the webinar today. And I will see, I've been wanting to reach out to her actually and ask her to give a talk. By the way, do you know her, Chris? Have you met her?
I haven't met yet, but have connections. She's got a lot of Philadelphia connections. So.
Oh, cool. All right. So I'll follow up on that too.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So let's get into the second half and go from 50,000 feet down to what I've called the art of the email introduction. I wrote an article in Forbes a few years ago with that subject, or with that headline, and it was interesting. Somebody on Twitter took a graphic artist drew this without me asking, and this is sort of it captures a lot of the concepts. But I'll take you through what I see as things that most people don't do. And again, this is from the perspective of I'm generally sending out over 10,000 emails a year. So imagine how many are coming inbound. As a venture capitalist, you get a ton of inbound email, and these are things that I've noticed and would propose from being on the receiving end of people that, as someone who doesn't have a lot of time and is inundated with inbound, and how can you have better success in reaching out to busy people. and I think it applies just generally. So the first thing I would say is the concept of doing the work. And one place where I think that really exemplifies itself is if, let's say a startup wants to pitch me about their company. I would say that more than half the time when I get that email, there's no evidence that they've even looked at our website. The context is they need money and we have money. And then the email is 100% about what they do. And what is missing from most everything is doing a little bit of work to, number one, show that you've done some research. Yeah. And I'll give a lot more examples of that, but also to show what's the rationale on why this is a fit. And it literally could be one line. Chris, I noticed you invested in Warby Parker. We're working on something that's basically like, Warby Parker for dogs, or whatever the idea might be. But it's related to, there's a reason why they're sending it, other than they need money and we have it. So again, I think most people don't do the work. Another example is you're sitting around in a board meeting or staff meeting, and someone will say, "Hey, can you introduce me to this person?" The other person will say, "Okay," and then it'll never happen. It's very different than me saying, Phil, can you introduce me to Annie Duke? Sure. And then the difference between me then sending an email to Phil saying, "Hey, remember you said you could introduce me to Annie? That'd be fantastic. Here's the reason I want to talk to her, and here's a link to our website." And that's the work that most people don't do, and you should. Another key point to me is asking permission first. A lot of people think they're doing everyone a favor by making introductions to two different folks with no real context or no agreement up front. And that's just a bad habit. Fred Wilson calls it the double opt-in. I find it's extra work, but always worth it to ask both parties. If you're initiating it, but typically someone's asking you, you're introducing a target or a third person, that you should separately ask that third person and get their engagement and agreement before you you go ahead and make that connection. I think, Phil, you were telling me a story about some fundraising stories that related very much to that proved that point as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my, this is such an irritant for me. We agree so much on this. I try to teach people this all the time. Do not do the cold intro. It's a bummer for everybody. But if you ask permission first, if you ask me, well, you and I had this last week. You asked me to introduce you to a CEO of a company. So I went and asked him first, of course. Without you on the email. So I want to give them space and provide the context. It does mean, as the connector, you have to do a little bit more work. Yep. But it's so generous to everybody involved. Yeah. And and 99 times out of 100, people will say yes and also be really thankful that you asked them first. Yeah. In fact, because you asked them first, they'll often say yes.
And even if they say no, like, you're doing them a favor and saving them time and not creating an obligation where they either need to ignore it or them to say no because it's not a fit, or worse yet, make them waste half an hour for something that shouldn't have ever happened. Yeah. And so that's like, asking permission is a good muscle to develop. Another important one is, when you're sending an email, is to create a unique, relevant, custom subject line. Not so much to like grab attention to get read, although that could be part of it, but more to not get lost in the, Gmail sorts emails based on the subject line. Do you know how many emails are in my inbox with the word intro right now? It's crazy. And like, it should, like, to me, it should have the names of the parties or the companies or the type of request. And you know, I see people even taking this to further extremes where they're like typing in the front, like either action required or like 5-minute read, or like people are just putting more to the subject line, because when you're on a phone and moving quickly, that means a lot. The other example of this is if you're sending your resume, don't call it resume.doc.
Oh God.
You put your name on it, you put a date on it, etc.
We wrote about that 20 years ago.
Yes.
Chris. Yeah.
So, this is, so I will admit I've got like a love-hate with LinkedIn. I've been on it forever, and it's the place where all of my, you know, work history and a lot of my connections and some of the things I publish, like it's the definitive place. But in terms of connecting and reaching me, like literally just today I came out of a meeting and someone says, "Hey, did you get that email I sent you?" I said, "No, I didn't see it." It's like, "Well, I commented on something for you on LinkedIn." I said, "I just don't see it." That's the worst way to reach me personally. And I think it's not it's, you know, get different businesses, different people will have different answers, you know, different experiences here. But mine is that is the single worst place to try and reach someone, is in the noise of LinkedIn. Like, you should find someone's email address and reach out directly that way to stand out.
Totally. Yeah.
Another thing I would argue is that
yes,
you should be, when you're sending outreach or you're proposing an idea or concept, you should really include everything that person would need to make a decision on whether to consider it. Maybe not the full yes or no, but to have the context of what it's about. And like just this morning, I took a call that was scheduled on Monday from someone who just, "Hey, like I wanted to catch up with you about something. Can we talk?" And up until the moment I got on the call, I didn't know what it was even about. And I usually don't take those calls, but I did. And it was a legitimate request, but I could have prepared or thought more about it if it was in the context. And I recommend people do that. And too often people just like say, "Hey, do you want to get together for coffee?"
right.
And maybe some people have a lot of time for that, but a lot of people don't. And it's not about the coffee. Like, I think it's definitely like better to be really specific about what you're looking for, or give them everything they need to make a decision on it.
You know, Chris, just on that point.
Yep.
So, as you know, I've worked with a lot of people on that, and in fact, one of the CEOs of Berkshire Hathaway passed away last year, and his wife was trying to figure out a bunch of stuff. And I said, why don't you write a letter to Warren Buffett? He'll respond. And now this is an extreme version. She was still in grieving. Right? And but she did what I find a lot of people do. One of the reasons people are not explicit, and I talk about this in my book, is that they're afraid to say what they really want. So they put all this other stuff in there. And she had this long letter, and in nowhere did it actually ask the thing that she wanted.
Yeah.
So I said, let me work with you on this, you know, and I used all her same language. I just totally reorganized the thing.
That's great.
And, you know, that's totally understandable in that. But in a professional situation, you know, if you're asking me for help with your job search, tell me that's what you want help with. Right?
I think people are afraid to hear no, or that won't be. And I think like to the prior point about asking permission, is most people are willing to help, or could, you know, maybe they can give you an answer by email versus having to have a call or meet with you. Right. And you know, but I encourage it. And one way I like to see that done, or that I ask people to do, is to send me a self-contained forwardable email.
Yes.
The SCFE. It's not a great acronym, or it doesn't slip off the tongue, but it's the right way to describe it. And to the left is a perfect example of someone I didn't know connected to me through someone I did, and perfectly described what the historically black college and university VC club is, and when their event was, and what they wanted me to talk about. And yeah, it's a Saturday, but we'd really love you to have you. Everything was there so that I could say yes to the introduction and yes to the event. And it was just like the perfect email versus, again, like if you ask me for an introduction and I say yes, I'll say, send me a self-contained forwardable email that has everything in there. If you're looking for a job, it's got your LinkedIn link or your resume. If you're proposing, your product or service, it's got information on it, a link to your website, whatever the case might be, so that when I get it, I can just forward it to my contact with a one-liner that they should take a look at this and why. And then it's done. If you just ask me to do something like that for you, I have to think of the wording I have to describe who you are and what you do. It goes down in my priority list. It doesn't get done. Like this is a big one, an example of doing the work, but I think it pays off.
Hey, a question for you about that
yep.
one, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So one of the things I often ask people to do for me, and I'd like to know your opinion on this, because it takes a little bit, it's sort of a different approach, and I wonder what you think, is instead of the self-containable forwardable email, I'll say, write an email as if you're me in my voice, asking permission to make the intro.
So
you have a point, which is better?
You and I will differ on this. And a lot of times when I ask for this, what people do is try and create an email in my voice. And I don't want you to write in my voice for me. I don't want you to, like, I think that's unnatural. It's not me. Like to me, it should be from the requester to the target. In the case of what you're seeing here, it's from Jorge Torres to me, but he's sending it through Nick.
Right.
And he's not trying to say, like, he's not trying to write the words for Nick. And it's it's much easier and natural for it to be his own words about his situation to the target, and then it's coming through me, and then I just put the one-liner or the paragraph or whatever I need on top to give the context of why I think this is worth you checking it out. I've known Phil for 10 years, and he's great. You should definitely take a look at this if it's a fit.
I think this is an easier approach. I mean, I will often ask people to write in my voice, knowing that I'll change it, but they don't seem to be able to do it, actually.
Yeah, it's what people do flip into that. The only time, like, if someone needs a recommendation letter from you or something more formal, then that makes sense. But I like to just forward it here.
I think this is easier. I think you're right. Okay.
But it's a personal choice thing. Just another little thing, but to me, it's a big deal. Having your own, create a signature that at least has your name and your affiliation. And if you would ever like your phone to ring for a person to call you, put your phone number there. You don't know how many times I've wanted to get in touch with a founder and I don't happen to have their number. There's no number in the, in their email, or sometimes I'll get an email from, like, a Joe Smith at Gmail, and I don't know which Joe Smith you are. So it's a helpful little thing to do. And you can also, put in links to, maybe it's your Twitter, maybe it's content, your latest article. It's an opportunity to get more about you out in every email.
Yeah, it's great.
And all of this is to make it easy to help you. You're doing the work to lower the bar on what you're asking anyone else to do on your behalf, and to make it as easy as possible. And part of that, in my mind, is to make it easy to say no. Whereas you're like, in most every time when I'm sending something like this, I will forward it and say, here's something from one of our companies that we thought might be of interest to you. We think the founders are great and we're excited about them. But I'll always put in, let me know if you're interested. No need to do anything if you're not. Meaning, like, don't even reply to me if this isn't a fit. And I'm taking the I'm not creating an obligation. Like, I saw someone on Twitter kind of jokingly showing someone's salutation to like a long email request was, "I look forward to your prompt reply, comma, their name," which is to me is literally the opposite. Like you're not creating an obligation, you're giving people an out, and by giving them that out, I find you often hear them, you often get more positive responses and appreciation of you not creating this one-way obligation. And then the other flip side is learning to say no. This is just a cute thing I got from Winston Churchill in the middle of World War I, like promptly but firmly thanking someone for a letter and declining whatever they asked for. I think it just an example of it working both ways. Phil, I'll ask you so we don't take time polling here, but you send someone out to someone and they don't respond. How many times should you follow up? What do you think the number is?
Are you asking me that? Or
yeah, I
am. So say the context again. Do you know this person already?
It can vary, but the context is you put together a thoughtful outreach with a rationale and ask permission or whatever, and you don't get a response. Like where I'm heading with it, my sense is you should follow up a small number of times. Maybe it's one time, maybe it's 3 times, maybe it's 2, but it's in that neighborhood. I've been in front of an audience of salespeople, and someone said the right number is 30. And I don't think that's the right number. Like my sense is it should be a small amount of follow up, and then on the last one, whether it's the second or the third or whatever you pick, I would encourage you to think of putting something in like, it seems as if this isn't a fit for you. So this will be my last email on the subject, where you close the loop and you turn it off, versus it being an open-ended loop where they're wondering if you're going to send another email or not, and they can just put it in their back burner, versus you might even be able to elicit a little bit of fear of missing out by telling them this opportunity is going away unless they tell you otherwise. And I've often found that response can light up and reignite an interaction.
So I have a very specific subject line that I use for that second or third email. It's assuming you are not interested, comma, yes, question mark.
Got it.
And then in the text I say, I know we were introduced or we spoke and you seem interested, but I haven't heard from you, so I'm assuming you're not interested, which is fine. I won't follow up again, but if I'm wrong about that, let me know.
Exactly. And I've found that those often
always boom.
It always lights it up. It's like, I don't know, there's a term like reverse negative or what, but there's something that like that strikes at our psyche, and people don't want to miss out. And I like that as an approach. I'm going to keep moving just because I'm tracking our time and want to leave some questions.
Yeah.
Time for questions. I think you should take the time to personalize. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, if you have questions, put them in the control panel while Chris continues. Okay, go ahead.
And I think like the kind of outreach I'm talking about, everything is worth personalizing, even if it's just a one-liner. Hey, Phil, I saw this and thought it might be of interest to you, Chris. That's different than a mass mailing, dear first name, like, and I think that's the way that you should be doing it. When you get a reaction, lean into your response, offer multiple dates to meet. Like differences show when you lean into a response. This is an old term from when modems used to connect. One would send back a signal saying "ack." It's just a shorthand for saying what I find really powerful is, and some people call it like email like your boss's boss does, meaning quick 1 or 2 word responses, right? Like just a simple like on it, got it, yeah. Like that means a world of difference than it's just sitting there in the abyss. And I always love when someone gives me a got it, I know that they do. Yeah. I think you shouldn't be afraid to let some personality show who you are. More of your your natural form of speaking. You know, a lot of my young founders I work with, they speak in animated GIFs, and that's their language, and that's cool for them. But you know, within reason, I think you should let your personality show. You should always take time to say, you know, less is more. Or sometimes people even put in like a, you know, TLDR, too long don't read, like here's the takeaway up top, and then there's the 10 pages below. But
Right.
like get it in one page or in one screen. It takes more time, but I think it's worth it. Think about your response rates. When you're sending out emails, what % do you get back with a response? Me personally, I aim for about 80% response. That's a good range for me to be in. If I'm getting 100%, I'm not aiming high enough, right? If you're in the single digits, you're spamming people. Like, so you have to find like what's the right response rate range that you think you should be in. No time for this, but if you look up Adam Braun and his $1 million Bitcoin story, it is the perfect email that kind of covers everything I talked about here that raised $1 million for his fundraiser, for his charity. Customer relationship management, I would encourage you to think of your contacts, your database, as an important strategic asset that you build over time, not just the thing that happens to be in your phone and has, you know, out of date contacts or people, you know, on LinkedIn that you never really met. Like, just thinking of it's an asset that you want to build over time and treat it importantly, get context in of where and how you met people, what they're interested in, what the interactions were, and then that's a basis to reach out and stay connected. Another just important recommendation is having some kind of system for follow-up and prioritization. This is GTD refers to getting things done. David Allen is the guy that wrote the book on that. There's a lot of other tools and methodologies, but it's just to have something that gets things out of your brain and into a system you trust, so that when you have an incremental period of time or effort, where would you best apply that? What's the next thing you should do? And this is kind of my getting near the end here to the, like my recommendation is using all these tools. If you could use them to make one extra thoughtful bit of outreach a day, I think it could change your world, your life, your career. You know, you're a salesperson, that one extra sales call. You're a CEO, that one extra fundraising call. I think it could be a thank you, like just going back into your career and life and just saying a quick, simple thanks to someone who helped you along the way. Like, just do one of those a day, and I think it can bend the curve for you. And then I don't have time for this, but yeah, these are just some real life examples of people that I've worked with on the venture side and partnership side that helped me along. And these are some of the founders that I've been lucky enough to work with and to work with over multiple years, multiple companies, multiple interactions. But we'll save that for another day. If you want more of this is the article that I helped write a little over a year ago, and it's the basis of what I sort of talked about here. But if you want to look it up, it's the How to Become Insanely Well Connected. It's a clickbaity headline, but I think the content is meaningful, and it was shared over 30,000 times, read 500,000 times, and seemed to connect. And then I'm open for questions.
Great. And by the way, I'll send a link out to that for everyone. Thank you, Chris. This is great. So questions or comments, or just thoughts? Jason, I don't know if I can cold call you, so to speak, but let me know if you're interested. I can unmute you and even have you talk directly with Chris or anyone else on the phone, Jake, Greg, Kevin, Ashish.
I'd also be interested if there's anything like you really disagree with that just didn't fit with your experience or how you look at the world.
Yeah, great. So let me see. Let's see if we got any questions coming in here. Okay, a lot of stuff about how great a talk this was, Chris. People really appreciating that. David Lowe. Jason, what do you think? Can I, let's see, what happens if I try to unmute him? Jason, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. Really love this. My question to you is probably, how do you keep up with this, keep this front of mind in busy times? Do you think of it like a habit that you're just, like you alluded to at the end, it's like just do that one extra thing every day? Is this a regular practice, or do you find that it kind of comes and goes as your need comes and goes for it?
Yeah, I think, well, I try and do it, whether it's, making a call to an old friend when I'm driving home from the train last night, or, trying to make it kind of programmatic. Like, I'll give you an example. So we First Round puts out something called the First Round Review every 2 times a week. And it's long form, high quality, actionable insight about how to build and run companies. And it comes out twice a week. And what I try and do is each time that comes out, I think of one person who that might best apply to. And I send it to them with a note of why I think it might be a fit for them. And so, like, every time that article comes out, and by the way, you could do the same thing with that same article. You could go look at it and say, is there anyone in your life or organization that might fit for, or pick anything else. And I find that to be a good way to do it. I'll give you another example. I'm going to a conference in a couple weeks, and the organizer said, would you like a, and I already paid for it. And then the organizer said, would you like a free ticket? And I said, well, I paid for mine, but if you're still offering that, let me offer to someone that should be there that isn't. And I basically was able to invite 2 other friends and colleagues and reach out with that offer that they both said yes to. So, like, just being on the lookout for things like that is one way to approach it.
Yeah.
But some people would rather have it in their list and it's on their calendar, and they're more programmed that way too.
By the way, this has come up a lot in the interviews I'm doing for my book, because this is a critical idea. How do you continue to cultivate relationships? And Paula Kerger, who's the president and CEO of PBS, she says this is one of the most important things that she does all the time. And it's what really has enabled her to do so much there. She's been there for like 15 years now and has really been one of their most successful CEOs. Jason Randall, by the way, Chris, who you're talking to, is the CEO of AppFolio and has been there a year. And in his first year, Glassdoor named him one of the top CEOs in the country in terms of
Wow.
of his leadership. So congrats to you, Jason. And it's a great question you asked. How do we do this in busy times? I love it. I love your answer. And by the way, people can just go to First Round and sign up for the review,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. So Jason, I'm going to keep going. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we have another question, interestingly. Well, we have several. But I want to bring in Steve Sterling, who runs a global nonprofit distributing medicine around the world. Steve, I'm going to unmute you so you can speak directly to Chris. So hang on just a second. Okay. Steve, are you there? Steve? Oh, well, he worked with Jason. I'll come back to you, Steve. Gonzo, let me come to you. You had a question. So, Gonzo, you there?
I am.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Chris.
Chris, in regards to the follow-ups, it sounds like a lot of what was discussed was really following up by email. Do you ever make it a point to switch up the medium? Do you go email, the phone, and then maybe
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm an older guy, and so I think I tend to. I think increasingly a phone call stands out in a world of text messages and emails. And I'll give you another good example. If I've taken more than one meeting with a company, and then we ultimately decide to pass and not invest, I always try to make that happen with a phone call and speak with them, personally and directly, and, give them the best explanation that I can about why we ended up where we did. And like, I find that to be like, I think that is memorable. I think another example, like at key points and moments, is to get in person in front of somebody, to go meet with them. Like we do a lot of like offboarding and getting feedback on how we've been as an investor and how partners have been individually working with companies after they've exited, either positively or negatively or somewhere in between. And you'll be surprised like how often, like, the most memorable thing that ever happened was when they were having a tough time getting through a rough, acquisition or whatever it was, that you took the time to go and take them to breakfast and meet them near their house, and like they never forget it. And so I think looking for opportunities like that, you should always follow up somehow, and often just a simple email is the quickest way to do that. But you can also make the follow-up stand out more with a call or an in-person visit. And
do you ever send a personal card, Chris?
I haven't done much. I do it occasionally. Usually if I've done something really wrong and I want to make up for it, I do that. I'll tell you a funny story that we were trying to get fiber into our office in New York City.
Yeah.
And we're not, like, it just wasn't going anywhere. Verizon was moving so slow, and I kept calling and emailing, and it wasn't going anywhere. And I realized that we were coming up on the 1-year anniversary of when we had placed the order for fiber. And so what I did was we sent a cake over to Verizon with a candle on it and said, like,
wow,
happy anniversary. We're still waiting for our fiber. And literally that afternoon, the trucks were rolling and they came and installed our fiber.
Oh my God. And who did you send it to, by the way?
I actually sent 2 cakes, one to the salesperson and one to the like the engineer in charge of like scoping out the building. And like great. It was so you could, standing out like that can be good.
That's great. Do you have time for one more question? Steve's headset wasn't working, so he can come back online. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is Steve Sterling, who runs the global nonprofit MAP that distributes medicines around the world. Steve, are you there? Steve? Perhaps his headset is still not working. Brittany, you told me it was his thing.
Oh. Yeah, I hear it.
Okay, Steve? Well,
it was. We have a question from Greg now, too.
Oh, okay. Let me move to Greg Frazier. Let's see, Greg, let me bring you on. I'll unmute, see if I can unmute you. Greg? Okay, so Greg is the SVP of product at Investopedia. Greg, go ahead.
Hi, Chris. First of all, I loved your article and I really appreciate the webinar. The question is maybe somewhat off topic, but what are your thoughts when you walk out of an interview, you spend an hour, on the value of sending a thank you email afterwards?
I'm not sure I'm following. What say that a different way?
Yeah, so you go to a job interview, you spend a long hour discussing everything you could possibly think of, and then you walk out of the interview. Do you still need to send a thank you email recapping what you literally just discussed, or is that kind of antiquated? How valuable do you think that is?
Yeah, like to me, something should be followed up, and it could be just a simple, it was great meeting you. I look forward to, hearing back, or whatever the case might be. I think it's also interesting to like pick out, like, was there one unique thing you learned, or, or like, I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned this, when you mentioned this, we didn't have time to chat, but I thought you might be interested in this article to follow up. Like,
Got it.
Where like you hook on to something that was a meaningful point or interaction, and then a simple like here's a little bit more related to that would be like, that's a nice way to differentiate, I think.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And Steve's question, I can just ask for him, was would you say that is there anything about what you said today, Chris, that you would tailor for nonprofits, that you would talk about in any different way? Or I know sounds like you were on the board, you've been on the boards of several nonprofits.
Yeah, I think like what I've noticed is a new generation of people at nonprofits that are less afraid to ask and kind of putting it out there. Like I'll give it like Seth Godin's son, Alex, runs it's basically like Blue Apron for people that are, that are on food assistance programs. It's called Lemon Tree.
That's great.
And, I'm a supporter, a lot of folks in New York are, and, he sends us updates like their company updates, like someone we've invested in. And he literally sent me an email the other day, says, we're getting ready to raise our Series A. And we're looking for your continued support. And like, I just find it's interesting when people are thinking of it more around investments and being confident in the ask, and versus like, the handout or here's our annual gala, thinking of it more in business terms. I find different and effective and a little refreshing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm sorry, Steve, that we couldn't get the audio working for you, but that's I think that's a really great answer. And you and I can talk offline about how maybe you can tap into more of the council's community, because most of the council members are not nonprofits, and they're more in the world that Seth's son is in. And I think that's really interesting to think about. Chris, I want to thank you again for taking so much of your precious time with us today. This is really valuable. We had a good group of people live with us. We're going to have an even larger group reviewing this later. How would you feel about people following up with you over email with questions?
I'd be happy to follow up. So
okay. Okay. And if you're too busy, you can send them a short answer. There's another.
And I will, Phil, right?
And there's another great Winston Churchill quote, by the way. This woman sent him a letter complaining everything, like you did. I'll have to look it up for you. And he says, "Madam, you very well may be right. Sincerely, Winston Churchill."
Oh, I got to track that one down. That's really good.
That's a really, really good one. Yeah. And I'll tell you the Yogi Berra Steinbrenner story later, but it has to not doing the call and not doing the phone call or the in-person meeting, and it led to 15 years of huge acrimony. But thank you so much, Chris.
Okay. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye.